The forceful shove in front of the crowd at the upscale shopping mall sent Keisha Washington tumbling to the ground, while the mocking laughter of Jason Thompson's new girlfriend rang out harshly. "How dare you show up here? This place isn't for people like you," Jason said with a contemptuous tone, believing his ex-wife was still the poor girl he had abandoned 3 years ago. Keisha felt the curious stares of passersby, heard the vicious comments about her appearance and circumstances, but she remained steadfast and unshaken, maintaining complete composure with a mysterious smile that left Jason confused. What her former husband didn't know was that the past 3 years had changed Keisha in ways he could never imagine. She was no longer the weak woman who had been scorned by his family and ultimately abandoned for being unsuitable for the future he wanted. Very soon, Jason would discover that he had just made an irreversible mistake by deciding to confront someone he should never have touched. Wait, don't go yet. Hit that subscribe button before we dive in. You've already invested a few minutes into this, and trust me, what's about to unfold will make you question everything about revenge. Once you've subscribed, smash that like button to show the algorithm that you're here for the real story. And comment below telling me where you're watching from. Los Angeles, Toronto, Miami, Amsterdam. Let's see that global reach in the comments. Your engagement is the key to making sure stories like this one get out to the right people. Done? Perfect. Now, let's get back to Keisha's incredible transformation story. The Mercedes-Benz glided through the familiar streets of Brooklyn like a ghost returning to haunt old memories. Keisha Washington gripped the leather steering wheel, her manicured fingers betraying none of the anxiety coursing through her veins. The brownstone buildings and corner bodegas hadn't changed much in 3 years, but everything felt different now, smaller somehow, as if her world had expanded beyond the boundaries of this neighborhood that once defined her entire existence. She pulled into the narrow driveway of the house where her grandmother Maya still lived. The same peeling paint and crooked mailbox exactly as she remembered. Maya Williams emerged from the front door before Keisha could even turn off the engine, her 75-year-old frame moving with surprising speed. The elderly woman's face lit up with pure joy, wrinkles deepening around eyes that sparkled with unshed tears. "Baby girl, you came home," Maya whispered as she pulled Keisha into a fierce embrace that smelled of lavender and vanilla, the same comforting scents that had soothed countless childhood hurts. Keisha felt herself melting into the familiar warmth, remembering how this tiny woman had been her anchor when the rest of the world seemed determined to tear her apart. "I missed you so much, Grandma," Keisha murmured against Maya's shoulder, surprised by the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She had built walls around her heart over the past few years, necessary barriers that protected her from further pain. But standing in her grandmother's arms, those defenses crumbled like sand castles against the tide. Maya pulled back to study her granddaughter's face, noting the expensive cut of her simple black dress, the subtle glow of professional makeup, the confident set of her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "You look different, sweetheart," Maya observed, leading Keisha toward the house. "Stronger. Like you found something you were looking for." Keisha managed a small smile, deflecting the probing gaze with practiced ease. She had become an expert at revealing just enough truth to satisfy curiosity while keeping her most precious secrets locked away. The transformation in her life was too profound, too fragile to expose to scrutiny just yet. "I'm doing well, Grandma. Really well. Work has been good to me." The living room felt like stepping into a time capsule, with its faded floral wallpaper and collection of family photographs spanning decades. Keisha's eyes landed on her wedding photo with Jason, still displayed on the mantelpiece despite everything that had happened. Maya followed her gaze and made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. "I should have taken that down years ago, but I kept hoping you might want to talk about what really happened." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and carefully buried pain. Keisha settled into the worn velvet armchair that had been her favorite reading spot as a child, memories flooding back with unexpected intensity. 3 years ago, she had fled this house with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart, convinced she would never recover from the devastation Jason had left in his wake. His final words echoed in her mind like a cruel mantra. "You're not suitable for the future I want, Keisha. You'll never fit into my world." The woman who had believed those words seemed like a stranger now, someone she barely recognized. "I'm planning to stay for a few days, if that's okay," Keisha said, steering the conversation away from dangerous territory. "You mentioned on the phone that you haven't been feeling well, and I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Maya's face brightened at the prospect of extended company, though concern flickered in her weathered features. She had raised Keisha from the age of 10 when her parents died in a car accident, and the bond between them transcended typical family relationships. They were survivors who had learned to depend on each other when the world proved unreliable. "Oh, honey, having you here would be a blessing," Maya replied, settling into her own chair with a slight wince that she tried to hide. "These old bones aren't what they used to be, and the doctor says I need to start taking better care of myself. But enough about me. Tell me about this work that's treating you so well. Are you still writing those freelance articles?" Keisha nodded, allowing the partial truth to stand. Her writing had indeed opened doors, though not in the way her grandmother imagined. As evening shadows began to creep across the living room, Keisha felt the familiar tug of conflicted emotions that had brought her back to Brooklyn. Part of her longed to share the incredible journey her life had taken, to reveal the love she had found and the security she now enjoyed. But another part, the part that still remembered the sting of rejection and judgment, preferred the safety of secrets. Some transformations were too precious to risk, too perfect to potentially tarnish with outside opinions or well-meaning advice that might miss the mark. The photograph on the mantelpiece seemed to mock Keisha as she sat in the quiet living room later that evening, Maya having retired early with her medications. 5 years of marriage condensed into a single frozen moment. Herself in an ivory dress that had cost more than her grandmother's monthly rent. Jason resplendent in his tailored tuxedo, both of them smiling as if they believed forever was actually possible. She remembered the hope that had filled her that day, the naive certainty that love could conquer the obvious disparities between their worlds. Jason Thompson had been everything she thought she wanted, ambitious, charming, and blessed with the kind of effortless confidence that came from generational privilege. When they met at a legal aid clinic where she volunteered, he had seemed different from other attorneys, genuinely interested in helping underserved communities rather than just padding his resume. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive dinners and Broadway shows, Jason delighting in introducing her to experiences she had only read about in magazines. For a brief, shining period, Keisha had allowed herself to believe that fairy tales could happen to girls from Brooklyn. The Thompson family had other ideas entirely. Margaret Thompson, Jason's mother, possessed the particular brand of cruelty that wealthy women often wielded like surgical instruments, precise, devastating, and always plausibly deniable. During their first dinner together, she had peppered Keisha with questions designed to highlight every difference in their backgrounds. "How interesting that you grew up with your grandmother," Margaret had said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "So unconventional. I suppose some people simply make do with whatever family arrangements they can manage." The microaggressions had been relentless and suffocating. At family gatherings, Margaret would seat Keisha at the far end of the table, introducing her to other guests with subtle dismissals that painted her as temporary, insignificant. "This is Jason's friend Keisha," she would say, deliberately omitting any mention of their engagement even after the wedding invitations had been sent. The other family members followed Margaret's lead, treating Keisha with the kind of polite tolerance typically reserved for unwelcome house guests who had overstayed their welcome. Jason's promises of protection had gradually revealed themselves as empty gestures. When his mother suggested they postpone the wedding until things settled down, he had actually considered the proposal seriously enough to discuss it with Keisha. When Margaret questioned whether Keisha's background would affect his partnership prospects at the firm, Jason began working longer hours as if distance might somehow resolve the growing tension. Each compromise he made felt like another piece of Keisha's heart being chipped away, death by 1,000 small betrayals. The financial pressure had been crushing in ways that Jason never fully comprehended. While he stressed about making partner and building his reputation, Keisha worried about her grandmother's medical bills and the roof repairs that couldn't wait another winter. She had taken on additional freelance work, writing articles late into the night, while Jason attended networking events with clients who moved in circles where her presence would have been awkward, unwelcome. The isolation had been complete, too successful for her old neighborhood, too different for Jason's new world. The end had come on a rainy Tuesday evening in October, 3 years ago almost to the day. Jason had arrived home from another family meeting that somehow hadn't included his wife, his face wearing the expression of a man who had finally made a difficult decision. The divorce papers were already prepared, he explained, as if efficiency might somehow soften the blow of abandonment. "I need someone who can help me build the life I'm working toward," he had said, his voice clinical and detached. "Someone who understands the expectations that come with success." Keisha had listened to his carefully rehearsed speech with growing numbness, recognizing that the man she had married was revealing his true nature for perhaps the first time in their relationship. There had been no fight left in her by then, no energy to argue against judgments that had been months in the making. When he asked her to be reasonable about the division of assets, she had signed whatever papers he presented, wanting only to escape the suffocating weight of his family's disapproval and his own cowardice. The final humiliation had come when she packed her belongings while Jason attended a work dinner that couldn't be postponed. Margaret Thompson had arrived unannounced, ostensibly to retrieve some family heirlooms that Keisha had never even known existed. "I'm sure you understand that certain items need to remain within the family," Margaret had said, her victory complete and absolute. Keisha had left that house with 2 suitcases and the crushing knowledge that she had never really belonged anywhere in Jason's carefully constructed life. The gentle buzzing of her phone interrupted Keisha's melancholy reverie, Daniel's name appearing on the screen with a warmth that still surprised her after 18 months together. She stepped onto the small back porch to take the call, not wanting to wake Maya, but also craving the privacy that conversations with her husband required. The evening air carried the familiar sounds of Brooklyn, distant traffic, children playing in neighboring yards, the rhythmic thump of music from somewhere down the block. It felt like a lifetime since these sounds had been the soundtrack to her daily existence. "Hey, beautiful." Daniel's voice carried the slight accent that had first caught her attention in that little coffee shop in Manhattan, where she had been struggling to make freelance writing pay her bills. Even through the phone, she could hear the genuine concern that colored his words whenever they were apart for more than a few hours. "How's your grandmother doing? And more importantly, how are you holding up being back in the old neighborhood?" His ability to read her moods, even from 3,000 miles away in San Francisco, continued to amaze her. "Grandma's weaker than I expected, but she's still sharp as ever," Keisha replied, settling into the creaky porch swing that had witnessed countless conversations throughout her childhood. "And being here is complicated. Everything looks the same, but I feel like I'm seeing it all through different eyes now." She paused, searching for words that could adequately describe the strange sensation of revisiting a life that no longer fit her, like an outgrown dress hanging in a forgotten closet. Daniel's soft laugh carried through the phone, the sound that had first made her realize she was falling in love with this unexpected man who had wandered into her life when she least expected salvation. I remember feeling something similar when I went back to visit my hometown in New Mexico after the company started taking off. Success changes your perspective on everything, including the places that shaped you. His understanding came without judgment, another quality that set him apart from every other man she had ever known. I keep thinking about how different my life would have been if I had never left this place, Keisha confessed, surprising herself with the honesty that came so naturally in conversations with Daniel. Part of me wonders if I would have been happier just staying small, avoiding all the pain that came with trying to reach for something bigger. The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with implications about their relationship and the fears she still carried about deserving the happiness she had found. But then, you never would have been sitting in that coffee shop on Bleecker Street, struggling with your laptop and muttering creative curses at your deadline, Daniel reminded her, his voice warm with the memory of their first meeting. And I would have walked right past you to grab my usual black coffee and hurried back to my office, probably spending the rest of my life drinking inferior coffee and wondering why nothing ever felt quite right. The sweetness in his voice made her chest tighten with an emotion that still felt too precious to entirely trust. Keisha closed her eyes, remembering that autumn afternoon 18 months ago when her computer had crashed in the middle of an important article deadline. Daniel Rodriguez had been just another well-dressed businessman until he noticed her distress and offered to help, his genuine concern cutting through her defensive barriers like sunshine through storm clouds. Unlike Jason, who had always seemed to be performing his interest in her story, Daniel had listened with the kind of attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. Your family keeps asking when they're going to meet the mysterious woman who's stolen their CEO's heart, Daniel continued, and she could picture his smile through the phone. My mother is particularly insistent that we visit during the holidays. She's convinced you're avoiding them because you think they won't approve, which is impossible because I've never been happier in my life. The casual way he spoke about their future together still caught her off guard sometimes, so different from Jason's careful hedging and conditional commitments. Maybe it's time, Keisha said, surprising herself with the words. I've been keeping us hidden for so long, protecting what we have from outside opinions and potential complications. But being back here, seeing how much I've changed, makes me realize that I might be ready to stop hiding. The decision felt monumental, like stepping off a cliff and trusting that the wings she had grown would actually support her weight. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured, Daniel said, though she could hear the hope threading through his careful words. We can take this at whatever pace feels right to you. I'm not going anywhere, Keisha. What we have isn't fragile enough to be threatened by family dinners or public scrutiny. His patience had been one of the qualities that had slowly convinced her to trust again, to believe that not all men would eventually find her lacking. Their wedding 6 months ago had been perfect in its simplicity, a sunset ceremony in Santorini, with only Maya as their witness, the Greek sunset painting, everything in shades of gold and rose. No judgmental relatives, no social expectations, just two people promising to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. The memory made her smile, even as tears gathered in her eyes. Hudson Yards Mall gleamed with the kind of architectural ambition that transformed shopping into an experience rather than a necessity. Keisha pushed Maya's wheelchair through the soaring atrium, marveling at how her grandmother's eyes widened with wonder at the crystalline displays and towering glass installations. They had come for Maya's prescription pickup at the upscale pharmacy, but the elderly woman insisted on exploring the boutiques that seemed to sparkle with impossible luxury. "I never imagined places like this existed," Maya whispered, her voice filled with the awe of someone discovering a new world. The pharmacy visit had gone smoothly. Maya's medications now secured in an elegant bag that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. As they navigated toward the exit, Keisha felt a familiar contentment settling over her. These simple moments with her grandmother had become more precious than any material possession her new life had provided. Maya pointed excitedly at a jewelry display featuring pieces that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. Her childlike delight infectious enough to make Keisha forget momentarily about the weight of returning to Brooklyn and confronting her past. The collision with her former life came without warning, brutal in its suddenness and public humiliation. Jason Thompson emerged from an expensive menswear store, his arm wrapped possessively around a blonde woman whose designer outfit screamed new money and social climbing ambition. Madison Pierce, if Keisha remembered correctly from the society pages, a woman whose father managed a mid-level investment firm and whose mother collected charity board positions like trophies. Jason spotted Keisha before she could redirect their path, his face cycling through surprise, recognition, and then something that looked disturbingly like opportunity. "Well, well, Keisha Washington," Jason announced, his voice carrying the particular brand of false warmth that had once fooled her into believing he cared about her feelings. "Still shopping at places way above your pay grade, I see." Madison laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane, her manicured hand tightening on Jason's expensive suit jacket as if marking territory. The casual cruelty in their shared amusement felt like stepping into a blast furnace, but Keisha kept her expression carefully neutral, years of practice allowing her to mask the initial shock. Maya started to respond to the obvious insult, her grandmother's protective instincts flaring despite her physical frailty, but Keisha placed a gentle hand on the older woman's shoulder. "Jason," she replied evenly, her voice betraying nothing of the storm gathering beneath her composed exterior. "How unexpected to see you here." The understated response seemed to confuse him slightly, as if he had been expecting tears or anger or some other reaction and that would justify what came next. Without warning, Jason stepped directly into their path and deliberately shouldered into Keisha, the impact strong enough to make her stumble backward. Maya's sharp intake of breath echoed through the surrounding space as several shoppers stopped to stare at the unfolding drama. "Oops," Jason said, his smile sharp with manufactured innocence. "Still haven't learned to watch where you're going, have you? Maybe you should stick to neighborhoods where you actually belong instead of pretending you fit in places like this." Madison's contribution came in the form of a theatrical once-over, her gaze lingering on Keisha's simple black dress and understated accessories with obvious disdain. "Some people really don't know their place, do they, baby?" she cooed to Jason, her voice pitched loud enough for the growing audience of curious onlookers. "I mean, look at that outfit. Clearly, someone's trying way too hard to appear successful when everyone can see right through the act." Her laugh carried the particular viciousness that only came from someone desperately insecure about their own social standing. The moment stretched like a held breath, pregnant with possibilities for escalation or retreat. Keisha felt Maya's eyes on her, the older woman's concern and growing anger radiating outward like heat from a furnace. Other shoppers had begun to murmur among themselves, some reaching for phones to record whatever spectacle might unfold. Jason stood waiting, his posture suggesting he expected either cowering submission or explosive anger, both reactions that would validate his perception of her as someone beneath his notice. Instead, Keisha simply smiled, the expression reaching her eyes with genuine amusement that seemed to unsettle both Jason and Madison. "You're absolutely right, Jason," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that sounded almost fond. "I really should know my place by now." The words hung in the air with implications that neither of them could quite parse, though something in her tone made Jason's confident smirk falter slightly. She turned Maya's wheelchair toward the elevator with fluid grace, her movements unhurried and completely controlled. "It was so interesting running into you both," she added over her shoulder, the politeness in her voice somehow more cutting than any insult could have been. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your shopping experience." The dismissal was complete, absolute, and delivered with such serene confidence that it left Jason standing in the middle of the corridor looking somehow smaller than he had moments before. The security team materialized with the kind of efficiency that only came from intensive training and clear protocols. Marcus Chen, the head of security, approached their group with professional concern etched across his features, having clearly witnessed the entire confrontation through the mall's sophisticated surveillance system. "Mrs. Rodriguez, is everything all right?" he asked, his respectful tone causing Jason and Madison to exchange confused glances. "We noticed there was some kind of disturbance, and I wanted to ensure you and your grandmother weren't harmed by these individuals." Keisha felt Maya's sharp intake of breath at hearing the name Rodriguez spoken aloud, but her grandmother's surprise was nothing compared to the shock that rippled across Jason's face like a physical blow. Madison's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the sudden pallor that drained her complexion as the implications of that particular surname began to register. The Rodriguez name carried significant weight in New York business circles, synonymous with innovation, wealth, and the kind of influence that could reshape entire industries with a single decision. "Thank you for your concern, Marcus," Keisha replied with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to such attention, though she kept her voice low enough that only their immediate group could hear. "There wasn't any real trouble, just an unfortunate encounter with some people from my past who seem to have forgotten their manners." Her calm dismissal of the situation only served to amplify Jason's growing bewilderment as he tried to process this unexpected development in what should have been a simple humiliation. Marcus nodded curtly before turning his attention to Jason and Madison with the kind of professional coldness that security personnel reserved for troublemakers. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to move along and avoid any further contact with our VIP guests. Hudson Yards maintains a strict policy regarding harassment of our valued customers." His hand rested casually on his radio, the subtle threat clear to everyone present. Jason opened his mouth to protest, but the words seemed to catch in his throat as the reality of the situation continued to unfold around him. "VIP guests," Madison sputtered, her voice climbing toward hysteria as she looked between Keisha and the security team with growing panic. "There must be some mistake. She's nobody special, just some woman who married above her station and got lucky." Her desperate attempt to maintain superiority only served to highlight how completely the power dynamic had shifted, her social climbing instincts struggling to adapt to this new information. Keisha reached into her purse and withdrew a business card, handing it to Marcus with practiced ease. "Would you mind calling the main number and letting them know that Mrs. Rodriguez and her grandmother are ready for escort to their vehicle?" she requested, her tone carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to having her needs anticipated and fulfilled. Marcus accepted the card with a slight bow, immediately recognizing the embossed logo of Rodriguez Corporation and the private number that only family members possessed. The phone call was brief, but transformative. Within moments, Marcus's entire demeanor shifted from professional courtesy to something approaching reverence, as whoever answered provided confirmation of Keisha's identity and status. "Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez." The executive escort team will be here momentarily, and I'll personally ensure your path to the parking structure is clear of any obstacles." His emphasis on the word obstacles while looking directly at Jason left no doubt about his meaning. Maya finally found her voice, her elderly hands trembling slightly as she reached for Keisha's arm. "Rodriguez Corporation, baby girl. Are you telling me you married Daniel Rodriguez, the man they write about in Forbes magazine?" Her grandmother's astonishment was tinged with pride and a growing understanding of why Keisha had been so secretive about her new life. "No wonder you've been keeping this quiet. That man's company is worth billions of dollars." "Wait, Daniel Rodriguez?" Jason's voice cracked slightly as the full magnitude of his mistake began to dawn on him. "The CEO of Rodriguez Corp? But that's impossible. He's one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. There's no way he would." His words trailed off as he realized how completely he had misjudged the situation, how thoroughly his assumptions about Keisha's continued circumstances had been shattered. Keisha turned back to face her former husband with the serene expression of someone who had long since moved past the need for his approval or understanding. "You're absolutely right, Jason. It does seem impossible that someone like Daniel would choose someone like me." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet confidence that was somehow more devastating than any angry confrontation could have been. "I suppose some people are better at recognizing worth than others." The executive escort team arrived with military precision, flanking Keisha and Maya as they prepared to leave. Madison grabbed Jason's arm desperately, her earlier smugness replaced by panic as she realized they had just insulted one of the most powerful women in New York City. "Do something!" she hissed at Jason, but he stood frozen, watching his former wife glide away with the kind of dignity he had always claimed she lacked. The woman he had discarded was now completely beyond his reach, protected by wealth and status that dwarfed anything his family had ever possessed. Daniel's private jet touched down at LaGuardia Airport less than 6 hours after Keisha's phone call, his concern for her well-being overriding any business obligations that might have kept him on the West Coast. She watched from the terminal's VIP lounge as his familiar figure emerged from the aircraft, his usually composed demeanor showing subtle signs of the urgency that had driven him across the country. Even after 18 months together, his immediate response to her distress continued to surprise her. Jason had never dropped everything for her welfare, always finding reasons why his schedule couldn't accommodate her emergencies. "Tell me everything," Daniel said without preamble as he pulled her into his arms, his hands gently checking for any signs of physical harm from the confrontation she had described. The protective instinct that radiated from him felt like standing near a barely contained fire, powerful and warm, but potentially dangerous to anyone who threatened what he valued. Keisha found herself smiling despite the afternoon's unpleasantness, touched by his fierce devotion to her safety and dignity. "It wasn't as bad as it sounds," Keisha assured him, leading him toward the comfortable seating area where Maya waited with barely concealed excitement at meeting her granddaughter's mysterious husband. "Jason was trying to humiliate me, but he only succeeded in humiliating himself once the truth came out. The look on his face when he realized who I had become was worth 3 years of wondering what might happen if we ever cross paths again." Daniel's jaw tightened as she recounted the details of Jason's deliberate aggression and Madison's calculated cruelty, his business mind already processing the implications and potential responses. "This can't go unanswered," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that made corporate competitors very nervous. "No one treats my wife that way and walks away without consequences. I don't care who he thinks he is or what connections his family might have." Maya watched their interaction with growing amazement, her experienced eyes recognizing genuine love when she saw it flourishing between two people who had found their perfect match. "Daniel Rodriguez," she said, extending a frail hand that he accepted with gentle respect. "I've been wondering when I would finally meet the man who put that light back in my granddaughter's eyes. Thank you for loving her the way she deserves to be loved." The private investigation that Daniel commissioned took less than 24 hours to compile a comprehensive dossier on Thompson and Associates, revealing financial vulnerabilities that would have shocked Jason's carefully maintained facade of success. The law firm carried debt exceeding $2.8 million, with several major clients having recently terminated their contracts due to questionable billing practices and declining quality of representation. Jason's partnership was hanging by a thread, sustained only by his family's reputation and some very creative accounting that bordered on fraud. Madison Pierce isn't the wealthy heiress she pretends to be either, Daniel reported as they reviewed the findings in Maya's living room, his tablet displaying financial records that painted a picture of desperate social climbing. Her father manages other people's money, but doesn't actually have much of his own, and her mother's charity board positions are unpaid volunteer work. They're living off credit and appearances, which explains why she was so quick to attack you. Threatened animals always lash out when their territory is challenged. Keisha studied the information with growing fascination, seeing patterns of deception and insecurity that reminded her uncomfortably of her own past fears about not belonging in elite circles. So, they're both pretending to be more successful than they actually are, she mused, understanding dawning in her expression. Jason married someone he thought was his social equal, not realizing she's just as much of an outsider as he always claimed I was. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel, whose own rise from modest beginnings in New Mexico had given him perspective on the difference between earned success and inherited privilege. Rodriguez Corp has been looking for an East Coast legal partner for our upcoming expansion project, he said casually, though Keisha could see the wheels turning behind his thoughtful expression. It's a $50 million contract that could transform whatever firm we choose into a major player in tech law. You want to dangle the opportunity in front of Jason, Keisha realized, her own strategic mind beginning to appreciate the elegant simplicity of the approach. Let him think he has a chance at the biggest contract of his career, then pull it away when he realizes who holds the power. The idea appealed to her sense of poetic justice. Jason would defeat himself through his own greed and desperation, with no intervention required beyond providing him enough rope to hang himself. Daniel's smile carried the satisfaction of a chess master who had just identified the perfect sequence of moves to achieve checkmate. Thompson and Associates will receive an invitation to pitch for the Rodriguez Corp account next week. The meeting will be scheduled in our Manhattan boardroom with full presentation requirements and partnership evaluation criteria. His pause was deliberate, allowing the implications to settle. Of course, the final decision will rest with the company's co-founder and my wife, you. The Rodriguez Corporation Tower stretched toward the Manhattan sky like a gleaming monument to technological ambition, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun in patterns that seemed to shift and dance with each passing cloud. Jason Thompson stood in the marble lobby, adjusting his tie for the third time while Madison fidgeted beside him, both of them acutely aware that this presentation represented their last chance to salvage not just their careers, but their entire carefully constructed lifestyle. The security desk had already verified their appointment, and the elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending toward either salvation or judgment. "Remember what we practiced," Madison whispered, as they walked through corridors lined with awards and photographs documenting Rodriguez Corp's meteoric rise in the tech industry. Be confident, but not arrogant. Emphasize our boutique approach and personal attention to client needs. This contract could set us up for life if we handle it correctly. Her nervous energy crackled around them like static electricity, betraying the desperation hidden beneath her professionally polished exterior. The conference room commanded breathtaking views of Central Park and the Hudson River, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a living work of art. Jason spread their presentation materials across the polished mahogany table, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged documents that represented months of preparation and research. Thompson and Associates had invested every available resource into this pitch, even hiring an expensive consulting firm to help craft their proposal for the $50 million expansion project. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Pierce," came a familiar voice from the doorway, causing Jason to freeze mid-motion as he turned to see Keisha entering the room with the confident stride of someone completely at home in these surroundings. She wore a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, her hair styled in a sophisticated chignon that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. The transformation from the woman he had divorced 3 years ago was so complete that for a moment he wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Madison's sharp intake of breath echoed through the suddenly silent room as Keisha moved to the head of the conference table, settling into the chair reserved for the senior decision-maker with casual authority. "I'm Keisha Rodriguez, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Rodriguez Corporation," she announced, her voice carrying the kind of quiet power that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was worth. "I'll be evaluating your proposal for our East Coast expansion partnership today." The color drained from Jason's face as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. He was literally at the mercy of the woman he had abandoned, begging for a contract that could make or break his professional future. Madison looked frantically between them, her social climbing instincts struggling to process this complete reversal of the power dynamic she thought she understood. "This can't be happening," she whispered, apparently forgetting that sound traveled well in the acoustically designed space. "Please have a seat and begin your presentation," Keisha instructed with professional courtesy that somehow felt more cutting than outright hostility would have been. She opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a gold pen, preparing to take notes with the same focused attention she might give to any business proposal. "I understand you've prepared a comprehensive overview of how Thompson and Associates would handle our legal needs during this critical expansion phase." Jason's carefully rehearsed opening remarks died in his throat as he stared at the woman who had once loved him enough to overlook his family's contempt and his own eventual betrayal. The irony of the situation was suffocating. Here was Keisha positioned to grant or deny the very success that he had sacrificed their marriage to achieve, while he stood before her as a supplicant, hoping for mercy from someone he had deemed unworthy of his future. His presentation slides suddenly seemed inadequate, amateurish compared to the sophisticated operations surrounding him. "Mr. Thompson," Keisha prompted when the silence stretched beyond professional patience, her eyebrow raised in polite inquiry. "We do have other firms to evaluate today, so if you could begin whenever you're ready." The gentle reminder carried undertones that Jason recognized from their marriage. Keisha had always been more dangerous when she was being reasonable than when she was angry. "Keisha, Jason started, his voice cracking slightly as years of carefully suppressed guilt and regret threatened to overwhelm his composure. "I had no idea you were involved with Rodriguez Corp. If I had known—" Madison grabbed his arm desperately, recognizing that personal appeals were likely to destroy whatever slim chance they might have had at securing this contract through pure professional merit. "Mr. Thompson," Keisha interrupted smoothly, her tone remaining perfectly professional despite the personal history crackling between them like exposed electrical wires. I think it would be best if we focused on business rather than personal matters. After all, the past is the past, and we're here to discuss Rodriguez Corporation's future legal needs. The dismissal was complete and absolute, reducing 3 years of marriage and its painful aftermath to irrelevant ancient history that had no bearing on the present moment. Jason forced himself to begin the presentation, his voice gaining strength as muscle memory took over and years of courtroom experience kicked in to rescue him from complete professional humiliation. But even as he spoke about billable hours and partnership structures, he could see the writing on the wall in Keisha's composed expression and clinical note-taking. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with the kind of understated elegance that money couldn't buy, but taste could certainly arrange. Keisha stood beside Daniel at the entrance, greeting guests who had come to celebrate their official wedding reception, a public acknowledgement of the marriage they had kept private for nearly a year. Maya sat in a place of honor near the head table, her health dramatically improved thanks to the medical care that Keisha's new resources had made possible, her eyes bright with pride as she watched her granddaughter command the room with natural grace. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society, tech industry leaders mixing seamlessly with community activists and childhood friends from Brooklyn. Daniel had insisted on including everyone who mattered to Keisha, understanding that true wealth meant being able to bridge worlds rather than abandoning the one that had shaped her character. "You look radiant, Mrs. Rodriguez," whispered Sarah Chen, a venture capitalist who had become one of Keisha's closest friends in their new social circle. "Marriage to Daniel suits you perfectly." The Washington Rodriguez Foundation had been Keisha's wedding gift to herself, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting single mothers and women rebuilding their lives after domestic or financial crisis. Their first shelter had opened in Queens just 3 months ago, providing not just temporary housing, but job training, childcare, and legal assistance to women who needed more than charity. They needed opportunity. The foundation's success had exceeded all projections, attracting major donors and volunteers who recognized the authentic passion driving its mission. Across the ballroom, Keisha spotted a familiar figure near the bar, though it took her a moment to recognize Margaret Thompson without the imperious confidence that had once made her so formidable. Jason's mother approached hesitantly, her designer dress unable to disguise the weight she had lost or the uncertainty that now characterized her movements. The bankruptcy of Thompson and Associates had affected the entire family, forcing them to confront realities they had spent decades avoiding through privilege and denial. "Keisha," Margaret said softly, her voice lacking any trace of the condescension that had once made family dinners feel like battlefields. "I wanted to congratulate you on your marriage and express my regret for how things ended between you and Jason. I realize now that we made some terrible mistakes." The apology hung between them, incomplete and years too late, but apparently sincere in its acknowledgement of past wrongs. "Mrs. Thompson," Keisha replied with the same gracious politeness she might show any acquaintance, neither accepting nor rejecting the offered olive branch. "I appreciate you coming tonight. I hope you're managing well during this difficult time for your family." The response was perfectly calibrated, kind enough to demonstrate her own character, while maintaining boundaries that protected her from reopening old wounds. Some relationships, once broken, were better left buried than awkwardly resurrected. Daniel appeared at her side with impeccable timing, his presence both protective and supportive, without being possessive or controlling. "Mrs. Thompson," he acknowledged with courteous neutrality, his arm slipping around Keisha's waist in a gesture that spoke of absolute security in their relationship. Margaret nodded stiffly and excused herself, apparently understanding that this conversation had reached its natural conclusion without the reconciliation she might have hoped to achieve. "Any regrets about not giving her more of a piece of your mind?" Daniel asked quietly, as they watch Margaret retreat toward the exit, her departure as graceless as her arrival had been unexpected. Keisha considered the question seriously, examining her feelings with the kind of honest self-reflection that had become second nature during her journey toward healing and growth. The anger that had once consumed her thoughts about the Thompson family had evolved into something closer to indifference, mixed with pity. "No regrets," she said finally, leaning into Daniel's warmth and strength. "Holding on to anger would have poisoned the happiness we've built together. Besides, their opinion of me never mattered as much as I thought it did. I was just too young and insecure to realize that other people's limitations don't define our worth." The wisdom in her words reflected months of therapy and countless conversations with Daniel about building a future unencumbered by past hurts. The evening's highlight came during Daniel's toast, when he announced that Keisha was expecting their first child, a baby girl due in early spring. The applause that erupted felt like a benediction, blessing not just their growing family, but the entire journey that had brought them to this moment. Maya's tears of joy were visible from across the room, her granddaughter's happiness finally complete in ways that transcended material success or social validation. As the reception wound down and guests began departing with promises to stay in touch, Keisha found herself standing at the ballroom's windows, looking out at the city lights that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Daniel joined her there, his hand finding hers with the unconscious intimacy of two people who had chosen each other completely. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked, his voice warm with anticipation for everything their future might hold. "More than ready," Keisha replied, her smile radiant with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust in her own worth and the love that surrounded her. The girl who had once believed she needed other people's approval to validate her existence was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that true happiness came from within, nurtured by genuine love and purposeful action. Their story was just beginning.